All right, welcome everyone to another session of our Sunoikesis Herodotus course. This past week, you were supposed to read and discuss Book 8 of Herodotus, and in which one of the most decisive battles of the Greco-Persian conflict occurs, and that's the naval battle at Salamis. So hopefully you enjoyed that exciting action sequence. And let's see, hopefully we have some people ready to talk a little bit about what their groups discussed on Slack. Let me see if there's anybody at Southwestern that would like to comment. Maybe.
Here we go. It's an old computer, difficult to unmute the mic.
No problem.
Who wishes to continue?
All right. So Aaron here from Croesus again. I guess in Croesus we had 3 prompts, but they were pretty much all talking about the same general theme of kind of like what made Themistocles such a persuasive figure. And the first prompt, which is kind of what most people, actually everyone wrote about, was trying to discern the source of Themistocles' ethos and what made him such a credible person. And so the first response actually is written by Connor. So I'm going to let him explain what he wrote.
So I kind of touched on the theme of cleverness that Herodotus kind of seems to be interested in. I talked about how really throughout the entire history, Herodotus' history, he makes an effort to make note of when an individual is particularly clever, or even when an individual or group of individuals is not particularly clever. Kind of going back to the story of Darius and the debate between constitution that should be preferred, talking about how Darius wasn't necessarily the leader that was appointed because he was the most deserving of the position, but because he was clever enough to, kind of figure out the system that they were using. And I kind of drew that theme into the Themistocles discussion that we were having by talking about how Herodotus does seem to recognize with Themistocles that though he may be clever, though he may have or be adept at trickery, and that is useful in gaining him notoriety and winning battles, it does not mean, or it is not the measure of his character. We're still given examples of when Themistocles can abuse that trait. And so I talked about how in analyzing Herodotus' perception of cleverness and Themistocles' cleverness, that he did not let that shroud his judgment of his character. And so that was a discussion that I had. But Aaron also responded, so I'll let him talk about that.
Yeah, in my response, I kind of critiqued the focus of that the prompts were taking, just kind of focusing on one form of communication that Themistocles utilized throughout the stories that Herodotus tells. Kind of focusing on him as this masterful communicator, this really eloquent individual who persuades with the power of oratory. Which is true, that is demonstrated, but I think one of the interesting things and really the key to Themistocles' overall persuasiveness that Herodotus shows us is his ability to adapt the modes of persuasion, if you will, that he uses to fit whatever context he's addressing and whoever he needs to persuade at the moment. And so the 3 instances that I kind of compared and contrasted was the initial instance where he actually accepts a bribe initially, is persuaded by bribery, and then in turn turns around and bribes his fellow Greeks to stay with him and fight at Artemisium. And then later on, whenever he's addressing the Corinthians, trying to get them to commit at the Battle of Salamis with him, he takes a softer approach, it says, and he goes through this like logical pros cons analysis that ultimately is persuasive for them. But then whenever he addresses, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation on this, Eurybiades, I think, he really does resort to the impassioned rhetoric and really appeals to the pathos in that exchange, kind of painting the battle in grand good versus evil terms for him that forces him to change his mind, it says, ultimately. And so that's what I talked about, kind of the varying ways in which Themistocles was persuasive and the various methods that he used. And then the third response we had was actually about the third prompt, which talked about like the honor of Themistocles and whether or not there was a clear black and white good versus evil portrayal in Herodotus's account. And Kayla here really kind of rejects that. She says that even though Themistocles was kind of manipulating circumstances to fit his own agenda and wasn't really working for the greater good intentionally, his actions culminated in a positive outcome for all of Greece, and so it ended up serving the greater good, if you will. So it was kind of an indirect connection between this broader Greek morality and the specific actions and methods utilized by Themistocles. And that is Croesus.
All right. Thank you, Aaron and Connor. Again. Would anyone else at Southwestern like to speak? It looks like we have plenty of time if you want to volunteer.
I think someone might be already going for my group.
Thing,
I think someone's already going for my group. So.
someone's already designated for your group. What about you, Sarah? Go. Sarah's going to speak. She doesn't know it yet, but she's about to speak.
Okay, so I'm Sarah from the SD Gyges group, and for my group, all of us chose to do from prompt 1, which was how does Herodotus discuss the oracles in book 8, and what do his descriptions say about how he feels about them? And since only 2 of us responded to it, but we both basically agreed that Herodotus seems to revere the oracles and places like a great importance on their prophecies that they gave. And it was about how Herodotus mentions these consultations of the oracles. He seems to be providing a cautionary tale as to why the Greeks should abide by the oracles prophecies, because as we can see in the tale with the Euobians, I think that's how you call it, where they rejected the prophecy, they ended up being, well, I think defeated. So that was a cautionary tale of why you should always listen to the prophecies, which also in the tale of the Delphians, as to whether or not they should take their treasure away or keep it there, the oracle said to keep it there, and since they listened to her, everything was fine, and the Persians were driven back from Delphi. So Herodotus throughout Book 8 seems to show like very good things about the oracles and how you should always listen to them. So I think.
Good. Thank you, Sarah. And even if somebody else from SDIGs wants to speak, that's okay. We can have more than one. So thank you for sharing. All right. Let me see if there's anybody at Culver Stockton that would want to speak.
What about it?
Patrick, do you have anyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
Excellent.
working on recruiting. Yeah? Okay. Anyone else? Courtney? No? No? I guess not.
All right, too bad.
Too bad.
Let's see if the Belmont Abbey students are available. I know they were having some technical difficulties. Let's see.
We are available.
All right, good. We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes. Yeah.
You must be able to. All right, welcome.
Technical difficulties were my fault, so we may have missed a little bit at the very beginning. So if there's any repetition, that's my fault. But Emma is going to step in and speak for a minute from her team.
Hello.
Hey, Emma.
I'm from the Cyrus group chat. There wasn't a whole lot of discussion this week, but a couple of the things that were pointed out first, in our discussion, both of our posts this week were in response to our second prompt regarding the conversation in the very last chapter of book 8 between Sparta and Athens, and just the way that Athens responds to Sparta's plea not to make an alliance with the Persians. I just thought it was really interesting, one, how well they handled that almost, that could have kind of been an offensive thing to hear from the Spartans, but they say, well, it's very human that you would be concerned that we would do that, but also that's really silly. Are you kidding me? And they kind of like reinforce the fact that they are, standing for Greek unity, and almost call out the Spartans at the very end there saying, so send troops, send your army as quickly as you can, because if you want to be all about Greek unity, then we're going to need you to fight because it's not over yet. So I thought that was well written, and also just kind of another place where with such a long quote, one would question whether or not that's completely accurate, or if a lot of it could be Herodotus inserting some of his opinion as he's done in the past. We've seen him have a really big concern with Greek unity, especially in the middle of the Peloponnesian War. So I wouldn't be surprised to find that he'd maybe put some of that in to remind his readers that Greek unity is really important. Just kind of a nice way to wrap up the chapter, and kind of we've seen this theme of unifying Greece all throughout book 8. And so it was a good last point for him to be able to have the opportunity to say, so reiterating, unity is what's important here, and that's how we're going to win. So send your troops and come help. So that's what we had some responses regarding. There was also a brief discussion about the heroes in book 8, and some conversation from Thursday night's video session about comparing the heroes to modern day saints or the founding fathers. Just some reflections on that, and that was very well put, and a good analogy, and kind of gives us a way to consider it that's much more attainable and understandable, because otherwise it can seem kind of silly that they carried pictures of their heroes into battle and things, until you think about the ways that we maybe do that today. So that's what I have from Cyrus.
Excellent. Thank you, Emma. And we still have some time if anyone feels interested in jumping in. Do we have another one from Belmont Abbey?
We do. Maggie came in to add her voice to this.
Excellent. Welcome.
Hello. I'm representing Cambyses group. We also did not have a tremendous amount of conversation, but I can talk about what I was talking about in our group chat. I was particularly interested in the role of Artemisia in book 8. The first time we see her is in book 7, and she only gets like one little blurb. But what he does says is like very positive. Like he actually says, I find occasion for admiration in Artemisia, that she, a woman, served the expedition against the Greeks. So he says it's an occasion for admiration. So he says it in like her leadership as a very like positive thing or in a positive light. But then in book 8, we see a lot more of her. Like Herodotus actually designates like multiple pages to her, and we see her like having like some success. And it even goes as far as Xerxes asking her for advice. And so I thought that was like really interesting. And I think in the ancient world, it's a pretty rare thing to have a woman in any kind of leadership role, but a role where she truly does have some pull and some leadership, and like the king of Persia is asking her for advice. Like that's pretty extreme. But so that's all very positive. And then I guess like one thing reading that like kind of crossed my mind, and I hate to be like so negative about it because it's such a positive thing. But later on we read that about like how Athens is particularly like just like mortified that like a woman had like successfully like attained blows against them. And it says like, for they regarded it as a scandal that a woman should make war upon Athens, is how Herodotus puts it. And they're just like so embarrassed. And I guess it kind of made me wonder if Xerxes had allowed Artemisia's leadership simply for the sake of like degrading and disgracing the Greeks. So that's just like what I kind of thought of. I mean, it might, I hate to make a negative thing out of such a positive concept, but when I read about the embarrassment of Athens and the Athenians, I was like, I wonder if Xerxes did that on purpose. He's pretty manipulative that way. And so, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. So yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Maggie. Good. And yes, it is sort of interesting to have that great female military leader. Essentially, it seems like it's very unusual, but there is a reason why she isn't puffed up a little bit more. And I think Maggie hit on it. It's hard not to see some negativity in the reaction to her and so forth. All right, I think we're going back to Culver Stockton. I think they have someone to speak. So
Yes, can you hear us?
yes,
Good?
we can.
Okay, so 2 things. First, I just have a question, and then I'm going to introduce Lucas. I was just curious if anyone saw any parallels between the siege of Athens and the siege of Sardis. The first siege of Sardis at the beginning of the book. You know how in Herodotus so often he uses this sort of parallel structure or circular structure where stories in an earlier time seem to parallel later stories for us to seek connections between the two. So I'd just be curious if anyone else saw a link between those 2 stories. And now let me turn things over to Lucas.
Hello, me again.
Hello, Lucas.
Hello. This is in response to the discussion about the oracles in Book 8. We at our school we have to write a paper, and I've chosen to write mine about oracles throughout the book, throughout the histories. And I find it interesting that in Book 8, whoever that was decided to say that Herodotus somewhat preaches taking everything they say with praise and respecting it and like taking it as word. Because throughout the book, we've seen Herodotus introduce several oracles, and several of which he kind of shrugs off. And if you look at other commentaries throughout of Herodotus' histories, there are several that he shrugs off as not as important, or maybe they're not so trustworthy. And even the oracle at Delphi, which is one of the most trustworthy ones, he tells stories about how it could be bribed for human purposes, or it could lie. So I just think it's interesting that in Book 8, he has such a high opinion of the oracles, when even some of the most trustworthy oracles, he tells stories about them. So that's just a quick thought that I had. I wanted to think about it before I talked about it. So
Great, thank you. That's a good thing to notice of when he's supportive of the oracles and when not so much. Let's see. I don't know if we have any. We may have to revisit the question of Salamis and Sardis. I don't see any direct responses unless anyone wants to jump in from one of the other schools. We do have a survey in the chat room about your favorite clever person from Herodotus, and that is something that, from book one, you've noticed is something that he's interested in, is individual cleverness as an asset. And a couple of you, in particular, Aaron and Connor, talked about the idea of persuasive power and clever speaking. And I just wanted to throw out some food for thought that while Herodotus is writing this, so not in the time period of the Persian Wars, where Athenian democracy is sort of nascent and beginning to gain power and success as a system of government. But later on, 50 or so years later, maybe a little bit more, this is when some of the issues that could be associated with democracy start to come to the fore. And Themistocles, in his account of the Peloponnesian War, brings this up, but we also see this depicted in the drama, especially the comedies of Aristophanes of the age, of this issue of people who are clever at speaking and good at persuading may not be that trustworthy. And this is a big foundational concept, too, for Plato's philosophy. The idea that rhetoric and success at oratory are sort of surface skills, and if they don't have character behind them, virtue behind them, then we should be suspicious of clever speakers. So just something to think about as a debate that is happening in Herodotus's time of writing. I think Themistocles, however, you were not super suspicious of him, and I think he won the poll of favorite clever character. Oh no, Rhampsinitus, the thief, has some support there too. So let's see, anyone want to jump in about Salamis and Sardis? Patrick, did you want to talk about some of the parallels that you saw?
Actually, is this working?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Anyway, it was just interesting. Remember the siege of Sardis by Cyrus the Great when he besieges the Lydian king, Croesus. And I just thought it was interesting. Remember, in that episode, we have a Persian who sees someone drop a helmet from the, I guess we can call it the Acropolis or the citadel of Sardis. And then that enables the Persians to find this unexpected route that enables them to crawl up this incredibly steep cliff and then get inside and take the citadel. And thus, it's the end of Croesus. So I thought it was interesting. It's a similar story when the Persians attack Athens, in that an unexpected route is found, what would otherwise be seen as an impossible route up the cliff, the Persians actually take, and it enables them to break in to the Acropolis and capture the city. So I just was wondering, is Herodotus doing some interesting parallel between Croesus' Sardis and the fall of Athens with the Persians, the time of Salamis? So I don't know if anyone else saw, and I'm not sure what would he be doing. What an interesting, why would he be drawing that parallel between those two sieges? Just interesting thing. And by the way, I got this from William Johnson. This is not my brilliant observation. This is somebody else's, but I thought it was very interesting.
Yes, quite. I feel like I'm going out on a limb to grab some very hidden in the depths of my brain connection, but I feel like there's a Roman story, and one of the in some of the early history of Rome, of a similar sort of siege of the city where somebody sneaks up, the enemy sneaks up the Capitoline Hill because of the dropping of a helmet. That caught my brain. I don't know. Yep. Oh, Professor Haskell mentions it in Livy there. Okay. All right. Anyone else want to jump in tonight? There's quite a bit of good links posted in the chat room, especially about the powerful women. We talked Maggie talked a little bit about Artemisia, and that's kind of an exciting, unusual character to see a woman in such a great position of power. So keep thinking about that. What else? I feel like there was one other thing that you guys brought up in the chat room. Just making sure we didn't miss anything. We are on the last book. There is more battle. Salamis is pretty decisive, but Mardonius is going to continue to try to have try to subdue the Greek city-states on land after Salamis, but he eventually gives up. But there is one more major battle that Book 9 will focus on. So we're getting close to the end. Are you sad or excited? I don't know. Mixed emotions here, right? We're getting toward the end, but it'll be nice to have a conclusion. So I guess let's put the discussion of the end off until Thursday. We'll have some representatives from a couple of the schools come and set us up for Book 9. And yeah, next week's conversations can focus on Book 9, but also be thinking about the big picture of parallels that you've drawn and connections you've made.
Gwen?
All right.
Gwen?
Yes, Patrick, go ahead.
Maggie has just asked if she can pitch in with one more thing. So
All right, absolutely. We've got some time.
Thanks.
Please.
Hey, just one more thing. Last week during the video chat, y'all were talking about the comparison of Themistocles to Leonidas, and just what, I don't know, he's like, Leonidas is so moral and so good and so true to his word and all this, but then he loses, but then Themistocles is so tricky, but like he ends up succeeding. A different comparison that I kind of thought of like while reading is kind of like what you think of as Spartan and what you think of as Greek. Like with Themistocles, we see a lot of cases of him being kind of, I don't know, like underhanded, but it's showing his cleverness in a lot of ways. Like with the case, I think it's in 822, when he, like the writing on the rocks, and it says that he did it for two purposes. One, it was for like actually to maybe get the Ionians onto their side, but then also just the sheer like Xerxes just seeing the writing on the rocks would make him doubt his Ionians, and maybe they wouldn't be able to be in the navy, and it would weaken the Persian forces. So it just like I thought that was a different comparison and a different way to look at it, like how like what an ideal Athenian would have looked at, and like having those like attributes of like just being a philosopher, being all these things, and then being an ideal Spartan would have looked like. That's all.
Good. Yeah, thank you. I forgot that we had brought that up. Maybe I'll make a little poll in the chat room too, just a quick one to see what you all thought of, if you want to jump in on that. after we end, I'll throw that up. But yeah, a good point. The sort of, again, Herodotus is writing during the Peloponnesian War, which is really between two superpowers, Greek city-state superpowers, Athens and Sparta. And so what defines each sort of city-state's character and personality, those things are coming through in Herodotus at this point as well. He's a little bit more neutral, I would say, than maybe Themistocles, as he's writing about Thucydides, as he's writing about the war. But those national characters, like Maggie said, are part of how you pick Themistocles or Leonidas, is which city-state's value set do you prefer, might be the way to put that. So good thinking. So yeah, I'll throw that up and keep reading on through book 9, and we'll talk again on Thursday. Thank you to everybody who spoke today. Have a great night.
Bye.